Hello and welcome. You're watching France 24, and today we're bringing you a special debate in cooperation with the World Economic Forum. We're in Istanbul, where the forum is organizing a regional conference for Eurasia, the Middle East and North Africa. The topic that we're debating today goes straight to the heart of one of the most important issues in global economics and business today, the Eurozone's survival. More specifically, we're asking whether or not austerity is the right way to achieve a healthy economic recovery and to restore growth in the Eurozone. This, of course, at a time when some people are saying that austerity risks killing the patient that it was meant to heal, growth and the Eurozone as a whole. With me here on stage, I have a distinguished panel from academia, from politics and from business. Sir Michael Rake, he is the chairman of the British telecoms company BT. Brendan Howlin, he's the Minister of Public Expenditure and Reform of Ireland. John Evans, he's the General Secretary of the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD. Xavier Salah-i-Martin, he's a professor of economics at Columbia University in the United States. And last, but certainly not least, we have Mehmet Şimşek. He's the finance minister of Turkey. Gentlemen, thanks, first of all, for joining us here today at the World Economic Forum. Let me start with you, Sir Michael. The UK applied a series of austerity measures back in 2010 when the new coalition government came into power. 2 years down the line, where are we now? Has austerity helped or hindered the economic recovery in the UK?
I think the answer at the moment is probably neither. The real answer starts with the fact that there was no choice. I think the level of debt that the UK had incurred, its deficit, fiscal deficit, is one of the highest in the world. And I think the new coalition government quite quickly realised, unless it got on top of this very, very quickly, it was likely to spiral out of control. And I think the government had to demonstrate both political will to deal with it and rely on the fact that we still have our own currency and therefore to dramatically control and reduce the cost of borrowing. So I think that was key. I think the major concern now in the UK, however, is after this 2 years of austerity, and by the way, a lot of the cuts haven't even started to come into place yet in the UK in public expenditure, is the other headwinds, the Eurozone crisis going on longer than originally anticipated. Do we have an adequate strategy for growth? You know, can we just rely on cost cutting in the public sector? And that's the big question at the moment in the UK. What do we do to get growth? What do we do to get money to the SMEs, to hire people, to reduce youth unemployment, which is really becoming a significant issue?
It is the significant issue in the Eurozone as well as in the UK, as you were just mentioning there. John Evans, let me turn to you. You represent around about 61 million workers within the 34 member countries of the OECD. Is government spending making a real difference with respect to employment? As we're seeing austerity measures, for instance, bite in, are we seeing unemployment coming up as a direct effect of that?
Well, I think the coordinated measures which were taken in 2008, 2009, the beginning of 2010, actually had the effect of keeping people in jobs. If you look at the ILO figures and estimates in 2009, they're expecting an extra 52 million people to be unemployed globally. In fact, unemployment jumped by about 28 million, still too much. But the measures that were taken then prevented a complete free fall of the global economy. In our view, the switch rapidly over 1 or 2 months to just pulling away that safety net, that oxygen of the global economy, was too rapid, and it didn't allow the private sector growth to pick up sufficiently to take over the recovery. So now the issue is, how do we get growth back into the system? How do we put creating jobs at the centre of economic policy? Because unless we can put people back to work, get them paying taxes, get the economy moving again and putting confidence back into consumers as well as investors, then I think the risk of debt traps and spiralling deflation is very real.
Professor Salah-i-Martin, regaining confidence will, of course, require boosting competitiveness in Europe. And when you look at the European scene, it's often seen as if there is a northwestern, frugal, competitive part, and then in the southwest you have the more wasteful, if you will, economies. People are probably, or would probably think of Greece first and foremost. But where is, though, the Eurozone when it comes to competitiveness as a whole? How competitive is the Eurozone vis-à-vis other regions of the world?
I think regaining confidence requires diagnosing the problem correctly. And I think that posing the question on whether there should be more or less austerity, more or less government spending is a big mistake, because there are three big problems, three big areas that require three big kinds of solutions. One problem is debt. Public debt, private debt, bank debt, that problem should be addressed if we want to save European problems. Second is deficits. Third is economic growth. These are three different problems. Of course, they are related. If you decrease the deficit, you affect economic growth. If you try to cut the deficit to reduce debt, you might affect. So everything is interrelated. But thinking that you can solve all the problems with just one measure, at least you need three measures, right? One for each problem. And therefore, the debate should not be more austerity, less austerity. The competitiveness question that you ask is going to be relevant for the third question, right? We need the southern European countries, the periphery, to become more competitive, and for this there's a whole array of things they need to do. But don't believe for a minute that if you start growing, you're going to solve the financial problem, you're going to solve the debt problem. Those require separate solutions.
I just want to go back to a point that you, Sir Michael, brought up before, that Britain back in 2010 didn't really have a choice when it comes to austerity measures. I suppose one could argue that the Eurozone is in much the same seat as Britain was two years ago. Minister Howland from Ireland, what do you say about that?
I was just wondering whether my country falls into your northwestern frugal countries or your southern...
You're the exception that proves the rule, perhaps.
Well, I hope we've been neither. I think we were the poster boy for economic growth through the Celtic Tiger times. At fora like this, Ireland was the country pointed to. The core of our problem was a banking issue and the nationalising of a banking debt. And that recapitalising of the banks in Ireland cost 40% of GDP, or 64 billion euros. And that's a mistake that we have to reflect upon now into the future. We have to balance our budget. So the issue of fiscal consolidation is one that has to be faced. But I don't think the issue of fiscal consolidation and growth and job creation and stimulus are mutually exclusive. We have to have twin-track strategies. We have, in Ireland, I suppose, the perfect example. We have a dynamic industrial base. We have growing exports, but we have a very flat domestic economy because of the quantum of money that we have sucked out, in real terms, probably more than any other country since 2008. So we need stimulus back to give people confidence again to spend, and Europe needs to have that strategy. From our own perspective, I welcome the new focus on growth, certainly since the election of François Hollande. I think it has gained enormous traction in Europe, and we need to have that put into concrete measures now, specifically issues like having more paid-in capital to the European Investment Bank. Countries such as my own, where it is very difficult for the sovereign to borrow because of our impaired status, needs to be assured that we can have actually drivers for economic stimulus that will create jobs in the medium term. We need to look at the issue of recapitalising of the banks, and hopefully the European Stability Mechanism itself should be doing that, so it's not impairing the sovereign as we repair the banking system. And of course, President Barroso has talked about the reassignment, for example, of structural funds. There is a variety of real measures that are urgently needed now. I think we've talked about it long enough, and the response seems to be incremental always in the European Union, and indeed in the international community. We need to have a clear strategy now that can overcome the challenges faced by a number of countries whose essential economics, like my own, are very robust.
You speak there about real measures, and I suppose Turkey is a country that has come up with those real measures, because last year we saw economic growth of some 8.5% in Turkey. Finance Minister Şimşek, what are you doing right, and what can the Eurozone learn from you?
Well, circumstances may certainly be a bit different, but we've gone through quite a bit of adjustment in early 2000, from 2000, 2001 onwards. Our adjustment was actually very large. We had annual primary surpluses in tune of 6.5% of GDP for quite a few years. So I think through that fiscal adjustment, there was a boost to confidence. Private sector investments, private spending has increased. There was a crowding in effect. But that was because we were fully penalized for irresponsible fiscal policies of 1990s. The problem with Eurozone is that because some of the relatively, those countries that had poor fiscal positions were not penalized. They had access to capital at very low rates. At the peak, we had real interest rates in this country prior to fiscal adjustment at almost 20-25% real interest rates. So we were fully penalized. So what happened was, as soon as we start austerity, there was a boost to confidence. So a virtuous circle started. Essentially, as a crowding in effect, private sector investments, private spending increased. So public sector retrenchment did not mean weaker banking sector, did not mean high jobless rates. In the case of Europe, of course, you have a combination of problems. You've got banks that are already troubled because of toxic assets, real estate bubbles, and of course, the value of government papers that they hold has collapsed. So the banks are weak, and governments are relatively, obviously, fiscally, some governments are in difficult positions. So you really need some